And I want to say first, as I've said before with water, there are different views on how this grandparent is the grandparent of water. Some indigenous nations will call it grandfather fire or grandmother fire. So it just depends on what which nation a person is from, and they will utilize whichever one that is for fire. So I want to just introduce that by saying that we're going to be the two people that I have on the list here is Jason Nez and Neil Chapman. Neil is going to come on later, but I want to go ahead and introduce Jason Nez at this time.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay, I'm trying to, I just can't make it sound better. It's just the internet.
Okay, all right. Well, you can do your best. It just sounds like it has a little bit more bass.
Okay, a little more bass.
It sounds like, it sounds like you need a little bit more treble.
Oh, I can't even make those adjustments.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. And thanks.
Introduce you first.
Okay.
He's all raring to go. Thank you, Jason. So Jason Nez is a highly motivated, and I'll have him introduce himself with his plans when he's getting on, but this is just his background information. Jason Nez is a highly motivated archaeologist with over 16 years of experience working throughout the Navajo Nation and Northern Arizona as an archaeologist. He has worked for a variety of cultural resource management companies, the Navajo Nation, and various federal agencies. Jason currently works for the National Park Service at Grand Canyon National Park, where he is an archaeological technician. In his role at the park, he has evaluated archaeological sites for damage from fires and prepares for archaeological sites for prescription and wildfires. Additionally, he works as a firefighter as needed and distinguishes himself during out of area fire incidents as a fireline archaeologist and resource advisor. Those are mouthful of words, kind of words. So Jason's knowledge of the Navajo Nation lands and culture are assets regarding projects on and around the Navajo Nation lands. His experience growing up on Navajo as a farmer and as a rancher is evident in his self-sufficient attitude. He often takes the time to share his experience and knowledge with everyone around him. He often participates in public outreach programs such as Archaeology Day events for the MPS, the Museum of Northern Arizona, and the Navajo Nation, where he shares his knowledge of pottery. He also knows poetry. His knowledge of pottery and prehistoric cultures with the public and school groups. Jason is always looking for ways to advance Native people and humanity through natural and cultural resource stewardship. Take it away, Jason.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I can't make any adjustments on this computer I'm using, so I apologize if there's any bad sound. But as Rose said, my name is Jason Nez, and I'm Navajo Indigenous. Work here at Grand Canyon. As a couple of Hanishnay do, or Zesh, and a fashion machine, cut myself with the cherry door, now taking that fashion mother. Second, then, so I'm Zuni Edgewater, and I'm born for the Salt Clan. And my mother's father is Tango people, and my father's father is Mexican people. And I'm from Coal Mine, Arizona, south of Tuba City. So let me try to share my screen here. It says screen sharing is paused. Can someone share my screen, please?
I will work on that.
Okay. So I hope everyone's having a good day. It's a bit windy. We got some weather coming in. What if I unshare and try to reshare it again?
Yeah, no, you're set up to share. We didn't do anything on this end.
I'm not seeing any of the Zoom controls. Can you see that?
It's starting, yes. Here we
Okay.
go. Now we can see it.
Okay, so now I'm trying to get to another. So I introduced myself in Navajo, and that's how us Navajos introduce ourselves, so we can figure out who we're related to in the room. And I probably have a lot of relatives up there. I see Leroy Shing, one of my principals, really good. Grew up with his son in Cuba. So I introduced myself in my Navajo clans, and I joke about it, but I also have a fire clan. I do a lot of fire assignments. I work with management crews throughout the West, and in my fireway, I'm an archaeologist, and I'm a resource advisor, a wildland firefighter. And part of my job is helping to explain how we do fire, our relationship with fire, the landscape. And I go California, Oregon, Arizona. I'm all over the place, wherever there's cultural resources that are threatened by fires. And I work with management teams to avoid and mitigate the effects from fire, of which there's probably a lot we know about. So I want to start by asking everyone just internally, what do you think about time? We can't talk about fire, we can't talk about management, we can't talk about any of our resource issues without figuring out what's time to us, like how long has it been? And you think of time as this number system, but in a lot of our native ways, time is time immemorial. There's really no clock. Time is there, and events that happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, can be just as important now as then. And our grandfathers, we think of our grandfathers as older people, as knowledgeable people, as experienced people, and they're always teaching us something. They're always showing us something. They're always giving us examples of what to do, sometimes what not to do, but mostly what to do and how to do it right. And one of my pictures here, I was here in the park on a fire, and there was an old hogan out in the forest, and I was working with the crews to defend it. And the guy that lived in there was his horn-toed, our grandfather. He came out and he was watching as I was running around with a hose, putting out little fires, making sure the fire didn't burn the structure. So it makes me feel good when I protect resources, and I'm protecting resources for the natural environment and our modern human cultural environment. And knowing my relationship to this animal, this horn-toad, as my grandfather, it's very important because it attaches me. It makes me connected to the job I do and the people I take care of it for. Grandfathers might be animals like this. It might be time. It might be justice. It might be equality. All those things are entities out there. They're objects out there that influence us and teach us about these things. And I want to also start by talking about the elephant in the room, the mastodon in the room. We're talking about traditional fire. We're talking about traditional management, but when it comes down to it, we have to start our discussion with time, the time of these monsters, now yeti, the time of these mastodons and mammoths, this time immemorial since humans have been on this continent. And it just came out recently, a couple of weeks ago, that we have what we can prove with science, 23,000 years of human occupation in North America. That's 95.65% of the time here that we underestimate. we don't talk about enough. We don't give our people enough credit. Native people, we were managers. We're taking care of things for 23,000 years so far. And with time, I just threw everyone off balance. Time, the elephant in the room, native occupation of North America. What do we think about balance? How do we balance ourselves? Why are we talking about time? Why are we talking about mastodons? And why are we talking about fire? Why are we talking about grandfathers? When we think about balance in our modern times, right now in 2021, we're looking in all these different directions. We're looking backwards, we're looking forwards, we're looking sideways, we're looking up, and we're looking down. We're looking in all these different directions, and we're trying to find balance with that. We're trying to find this hajon, this balance that's out there. We're looking back to the past at our ancestors. We're looking at who we were, we're looking at who we used to be, and we're looking at the things we did. Most of it was great, some of it wasn't. But in order to move forward, we got to look back and we got to make our peace with that. And once we're balanced with that, it makes moving forward to the future a lot easier. And we're also looking to the side too. We have people that live around us, not just our family and friends, but we have neighbors, we have relatives. And as a tribe, we have other tribes. Navajo, we live by Navajo, we live by Hopi, we live by Paiute, we live by Zuni. And we got to find ways to work together. We also live by agencies. National Park Service is our neighbor. The U.S. Forest Service is our neighbor. Coconino County, Flagstaff, those are our neighbors. And we have a lot of rough history with everyone. But in order to move forward, we got to find ways to work together. We're also looking up at the air around us. We're looking at clean air for the future. We're looking at clean water. We're looking at it was mentioned earlier, the Red Butte mine. We're looking at the water table below us. We're looking down. We're trying to find balances with all these different directions. We're moving forward into the future. We're finding balances so that we leave something behind for 7 generations into the future, 70 generations and 700 generations. So what we do now, and for myself, what I'm learning from the past helps me make decisions, and all of us, we make better decisions for the future, long term, 7 generations, 700 generations. And we're setting up the board for our future generations when we're the ancestors so they can win. And we have unfortunate realities that we have to deal with. They're difficult for some people, they're emotional for some people, but these are the truths that we have to start with before we start communicating and before we start making management decisions. This is what the United States looked like before Columbus, and this is what it looks like today. We're always having issues in which land bases are shrunk, we're denied access to resources, and those are continuing fights that have been going on since the beginning. That's the reality of what we have to go with, and that's how our conversations should acknowledge that. It doesn't always have to be about that, but that's something that we have to consider, and especially as we move forward into this changing climate. Things are getting warmer, things are getting hotter. We've had record temperature, we've had record fires. I was out on the Monument Fire this summer. I was out on the Raphael Fire. I was out on the Brewer Fire. I saw a lot of increased scary fire activity, even for someone that's been doing this for 10 years now. And we ask ourselves, what do we think of when we think of wildfires? I think of the story my grandfather told me that he was in Flagstaff at the powwow, July 4th powwow in about 1969. And in those days, they would just grab anyone off the street and turn them into firefighters. So someone showed up to the powwow and they said, hey, all you guys, if you want to go make some money, let's go fight some fires. So all of my grandfather Lewis and his brothers, they all jumped in a truck and they went down to San Carlos and they fought a fire down there. And that was my first introduction to fire. And that's what I think of is grandfathers equal fire. And fire is a grandfather because it's a teacher. In our Navajo way, Coyote, he taught us how to use it for hunting. He took it from the creators that were holding it from us and brought it to us. There's all these stories behind it. And these stories, while they just might be stories, they also have a lot of basic management principles. They have a lot of guidelines that we go by, and it's those guidelines that we use. We think of wildfires as these catastrophic events now. We see it in the news, it's everywhere. We get the smoke, we see people getting hurt, unfortunately. That seems to dominate the news, but we can also have prescribed fire. We can have proper fire, like these little flame lengths and low intensity fires, and that can be achieved through a lot of cultural burning, prescribed burning. Here in northern Arizona, we have a 7 to 10 year fire regime in the Ponderosa forest, and going to college, I learned about that. And we think of it as, we sort of imply that it's natural. No one ever considered that, you know, like 7 to 10 years, what if that's human? We underestimate the intelligence of natives on this landscape. Where we go, we bring fire, we bring change. That's what we do. And overall, climate change is creating this new world that we're not used to, that we have to adapt to. We have to change the way we think about our human to forest relationship, human to wildland urban interface relationship, how we live in the forest, how we use the forest. All of those we have to think about when we make a decision when it comes to fire. We have to look back and see what our grandfathers did. And we got to look even further back into the archaeological record, into the historical record, to see what our great-great-grandfathers did, what our great-great-grandfathers did. All of that we're looking at through tree rings. We're looking at through stratigraphy. We're using all of the tools we can to try to look back in time to see how we were doing these things. And we have to acknowledge that our forests have evolved with fire. We create open landscapes, we create grasslands, we create habitat. Not all fire is bad. Fires cause certain trees to release their seeds. They remove small unhealthy plants. They reduce competitive grasses. They can trigger biological and chemical changes. They open up tree stands, creating space where sunlight can reach the ground. They increase healthy habitat for animals, and they reduce future fires so that they won't be as intense or catastrophic. And those are important. They're overlooked. Sometimes we get focused on, we want it out, we want clean air, but we're asking for so much that's going to cost a lot later. And this is what we want. This is how we use fire, is we want to have healthy fires, low intensity fires that are more natural, like the types that have occurred for 23,000 years on this landscape. We have to deal with some of our suppression effects, and this is part of my job, is dealing with these things. How do we fight this thing? How do we manage this thing? What kind of tools do we use, and how do those affect the landscape? We're trying to protect the landscape, but we're also trying to manage this fire. We're trying to corral it. We're trying to steer it. We're using bulldozers, we're using hoses, we're using people on the ground, we're using aircraft, and all of those can have effects on our cultural resources. We can dig through cultural resource sites. We can inadvertently paint a very important traditional cultural property red with retardant. Those are some of the effects that we're working toward avoiding out there. And yes, those are human effects, but acknowledging that our forests have evolved with fire, we also acknowledge that our forests have evolved with people. Our grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, our great-great-great-grandparents used to use these lands, and our impacts were minimal. But with our impacts, we brought fire, we brought animal migration, we bring new plants. That's just what humans do throughout the world. And 1,000 years ago, two kids were busting two rocks together, looking at this pretty sparks, and they made a fire, just like two kides playing with firecrackers. There's always going to be someone's campfire The wind hits it, it spreads some embers into the grass. And where humans go, we create animal migrations. Where we live, where we hunt, we cause animals to move away. By hunting, we start this genetic modification process, hunting the slower, weaker animals and maintaining the healthier, bigger animals for the long run. We bring plants with us, we bring our agriculture with us. We're always using the landscape. And it can be a hard concept for a lot of people to get, because in the Western way, we have management. Oh, we have to have a plan. We have to have alternative A, we have to have alternative B, we need safety in place, we need all these studies in place. But one of the more difficult concepts for modern managers is looking at our native way of doing things and realizing that for a lot of our native cultures, existence is management. Using the landscape is management. Being alive, being out there, walking around as a creator intended, that's part of the native management process. Populations prior to fire suppression, prior to the Euro-Americans coming to this continent, we were flexible. We moved across the landscape. When we needed to go somewhere, we just moved there. As resources were diminished in one area, we moved to others until the resources replenished themselves. Early American colonists, well, not just Americans, but French, British, Russian, Spanish, American, they saw native people using fire to manage these landscapes for resource health. Some tribes, they had a complex fire and ceremonial relationship, and some tribes just existed and inevitably started fires, which would cause all of those migrations of people, animals, and plants. So for us, existence is management. It's part of this plan, creator's plan. We talk about it. And by utilizing the lands that were created for us, we fulfill our roles as managers. And we've been in this role for time immemorial, whether you want to call it 23,000 years of human occupation, or for someone like me, that's forever. That's the beginning of time, whether it's where we emerge from underground or whether we evolve. In my traditional way, I see us as evolving with this place, as adapting to it, as changing and learning from new things and learning from the world around us. And that makes the world around us and all the things that come with it our grandfathers, whether it's water, whether it's trees, whether it's animals, all those things, they're teaching us something. They're teaching us how to manage ourselves. Because when we look at this bigger picture of the world around us, we see that our identity as First Nations people, we're made of these lands. As an archaeologist, I see pottery sherds, projectile points, rock art mountains, rivers, animals, plants. All of that is who we are. And when these things are destroyed and damaged through mismanagement, through crime, through just like hate, it affects us, it erodes us, it diminishes us. All these things are important for us. They're signs from our ancestors that we've been here. Che, grandfather Horntoad, he made us these projectile points that we find on the landscape. And they tell us young kids, your grandfather made that for you. So use it, pray with it. And if you don't, just put it back and leave it. And someone else is gonna use that in the future. And that connects us to the past. It connects us to everything that's out there on the ground. All these things can be out there and they can be affected by natural processes, floods and fires. And a lot of this is information that we're going to need far into the future. It teaches us about how ceremonies used to be. It teaches us about interacting with the landscape. That when things happen to landscapes, it happens to us. Part of our identity is these places, whether they're those animals or, I guess, geologic features, whether they're mountains, whether they're hills. And this one, Saltzith, is important, just like the Horse Lead and Flagstaff. Without these mountains, we can't exist as Native Americans. We can't have that part of our identity. These mountains out there are the foundations for how we live, for the foundations of how we maintain our balance, and the foundations of our ceremonies. We can't exist as Diné without these places we go to for plants that we interact with these animals and these sacred animals and beings that are out there. All of these things are important. Even coyotes and bears and badgers, all those little things are part of what makes this world go around. And even our domestic animals, like our horses, are gifts from the holy people, and we have to take care of these things. There's plants out there that we need: corn, squash, pinyon, juniper. All of those are essential to our identity. All of those have a place in our ceremonial process and have to be taken care of and managed. And these things, they're taught to us by our grandparents. They're taught to us by the world around us, whether it's Mikiche telling us about it, or going to a ceremony and seeing these things, or nowadays curriculum in school for those that don't have a chance to have their grandparents around. These things, they work our way into our art. They're out there everywhere, and they're always teaching us, just like our grandparents. Everything out there can be seen in that way. And our identities are so interwoven that when we look at these places that are out there, national parks, monuments, forests, recreational areas, we're looking in the mirror, we're looking at ourselves. How we manage land and resources, that's a direct reflection of how we manage and take care of ourselves. So we always have to be thinking about that when we're making resource decisions, when we're getting input on how we do decision making, how we do fire, how we communicate with the world, what science are we using, where are we getting the information from, whether it's tree ring data, whether it's fuel moistures, all of that is important. And we care so much. It's so important to us, and especially on this day, Indigenous People Day, there's a lot of pushback from people that just they won't learn. They don't want to learn. They don't want to change. They don't want to get new information. That North America wasn't discovered by Chris Columbus. It was the first Europeans were Vikings at Lenzanzao Meadow in Canada in probably about 1000 AD. And these are important because Native people, we weren't considered when it came to the management of federal lands. There's this myth that we left, that we gave it away. And that myth has led to these long and rocky relationships that are difficult to get past. And people need to realize that we never stopped using these lands, and we're still here. We benefit from working together. We utilize our traditional cultural knowledge and incorporate that into modern land and resource management. And most importantly, when we protect and preserve these lands, we're protecting and preserving ourselves, and we're protecting the future. So we always have to be working together. We all have a history, we have a place in time and space, and we look backwards for directions and examples. We listen to our grandparents, whether they're human grandparents, whether they're fire, whether they're water, whether they're sky, whether it's the earth itself, geology, telling us all this information about millions of years. It's all there. And we can work to prevent a lot of the things that happened in the past from happening again. And we can work to save what we have left. And that's going to be important for the future. So I've used my time. Are we going to have questions?
Are there any questions? So far, I don't see any right now,
Okay.
Jay.
So you can see that in this sense, grandfathers as fires, that's like, fire does talk to us. Fire does learn. It speaks in this different voice. It speaks through tree rings. It speaks through strat levels, showing old burns in the past 1,000 years. It speaks to us in the changes. That's how we learn things. That's how we communicate. It's a little different than what we learn in college, what we learn in school, but it is knowledge and it is useful, and it is helping us in our modern time.
Mhm. Thank you, Jason. That was a really good learning session. It really drives home the fact that sometimes you know these things, and then you go to college and you learn things like you did in your area of learning, and it just reaffirms things you already know and you've already been taught from your grandparents and those who have gone before you. And I think those are some areas that are very they're very close to Indigenous people's hearts. And those are some things that they carry with them each and every day as they wake up, and each and every day that they take out their corn pollen or their cornmeal, white cornmeal or yellow cornmeal, or their tobaccos. And when they use those elements and they use the fire to light them and they say their prayers, those are things that are always there, always within them as they walk each and every day. And I really appreciate the sharing that you did. I think it really has given it's helped people learn a lot just in this small session, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and part of acknowledgement, part of Indigenous Peoples Day is also acknowledging that Native people were smart, were beautiful, were capable of science, were capable of engineering. That's how this country existed. That's how we survived for 23,000 years. So we're able to be a part of management. We're able to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, Jason. I mean, for me, that was quite emotional. I don't know about anybody else, but I think it was really a real great.
Rose, you're muted right now.
Was I muted all that time?
No,
Nope,
just the last few seconds.
Oh my goodness. I don't know how that happened. I think someone muted me.
It was Stacy, our city clerk. She does that all
I
the time.
did it accidentally.
Hey, oh no. But I just really appreciate that. I think that I was just saying that with that, it was really emotional for me, just listening to that. And especially seeing that Che on that wood watching. And it seemed like just he's there just to protect as well, and just to give out, like he was giving out direction. And I thought that was really awesome. And and just a really great ending to that, to be warmed by that message, I think is totally appropriate. And then with Neil, that's going to present next, I think he'll just put what we call the exclamation point on it. Excuse me. So I want to introduce Neil next. And Neil, his heritage is that he is French, and that he's born for the East European, he's from the East European descent. And he is now the Forest Health Service and Watershed Protection Project Manager for the City of Flagstaff Fire Department. Neil lives in Flagstaff and with his wife and his son. Neil grew up in South Hadley, Massachusetts, along the Connecticut River, that is the ancestral homeland of the Mohicans and the Pucumtuk people. So he headed west for college. Neil received his Bachelor of Science degree from the Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. Neil's career in forest and fire management began with the Nature Conservancy, the TNC, at the Nachusa grasslands. Neil can correct me on that when he gets on, in northern Illinois. where it's located on the homelands of the Peoria and Potawatomi people and other indigenous peoples. The people of these cultures and nations, both past and present, he says, are an integral part of the tall grass prairie and the savanna ecosystem. Their stewardship, including regular use of fire, encouragement of grazing, and agricultural practices, was central to the evolution of this ecosystem and continues to shape the system today. In 2006, Neil returned to the West and began managing ecological restoration projects based out of the TNC's Heart Prairie Preservation. And this is an area of spiritual, here he's talking about is the area of spiritual significance for at least 13 Indigenous nations. Over time, Neil's work evolved into supporting TNC's North America Fire Management Team, funding and managing USFS fuel reduction projects, and developing innovative ways to improve mechanical timber harvesting operations. Thank you, Neil, for all that work that you've done for our lands. And here he is, Neil Chapman, our very own.
Thank you, Rose. I did not put a presentation together. I figured at the end of the day, there might have been some PowerPoint draining going on. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our fire management program and how it relates. And I think the overarching picture is we want to implement what Jason was just talking about. So our city's wildland fire management program is housed within the Flagstaff Fire Department, and our mission is to protect Flagstaff and its priority watersheds from the effects of catastrophic wildfire. We have 5 full-time staff and a seasonal crew between 10 and 14 people. So it's pretty unique for a municipal fire department to have a program like this, but they are growing in popularity. As a lot of municipalities are feeling the costs of catastrophic wildfires, there's a lot more local investment in this work. So places like Bend and Ashland in Oregon, Rapid City in South Dakota, even Austin, Texas, some areas of the Front Range of Colorado, they're all starting to invest a lot more in community-led wildfire protection efforts. I think the message is, you know, if we want a seat at the table at federal land management, or we want to make sure that things are going in a way that benefits our community directly, then we need direct community involvement. So it's really exciting to be part of a fire department that has a vision like this. And the way we implement our program, we have a couple different initiatives. One is the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project. And so that really is focused on the Rio de Flag and Upper Lake Mary watersheds. We're also part of the Greater Flagstaff Forest Partnership, the Forest Restoration Initiative, the Prescribed Fire Training Exchange Network, and the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. So we really work with a lot of partners. I think another important lesson is nobody's able to do this work on their own. Our challenges are great, and it takes a community of partners to really make a difference at the scales that we need to be working at. So we have a few strategic pillars, we like to say, within wildland fire management, and we talk about prevention, preparedness, hazard mitigation, response, and recovery. So those are all you know, fancy ways of saying we want to prevent catastrophic fires, but when we do see them, we want to be able to effectively respond to them and deal with the post-fire impacts. For example, all the flooding we've been seeing. So really, we're writing the book on how a community and large agencies work together to try to mitigate the impacts of catastrophic wildfire. And I think it's pretty clear the way we do that really well is by restoring the natural structure and pattern of our surrounding forest. So like Jason was saying, people have been here since this ponderosa pine forest has been here. So time immemorial, or if you want to rely on published papers, you know, we look at things that used to say 14,000 years and now they're saying 23,000 years. I was reading recently, there's a cave in Mexico that people are dating back to 30,000 years of human evidence. So basically the idea is that the natural structure and structure and pattern of our ponderosa pine forest is one that's fire adapted, which means it supports frequent fires and it's healthier with frequent fires. And that natural structure and pattern was created by natural ignitions from lightning and from cultural burning. So when we talk about a term called nature-based solutions, where we want to restore the natural structure and pattern, that nature-based structure and pattern, that's not just some random occurrence. That's people. So people are part of nature-based solutions. We can't separate those. So as we try to work towards restoring the structure and pattern, sometimes that's complicated where we have to get in there with equipment and cut down smaller and medium trees to restore and protect the big trees. Other times we can do it with fire alone. But really the vision is that we want to get in there and use fire in its natural way to maintain the health of our forest. And so really building off of what Jason was talking about there, I think one of the things that changed with our program, since we've been learning a lot more, working with folks like Jason and learning more about some of these cultural burning practices, is that our intent has changed. And we really want to take these lessons learned. And we're not just out there burning because we see trees with fire scars that tell us it should be burning every 2 to 10 years. We want to be burning every 2 to 10 years because we see the fire scars and because we have people like Jason telling us that this is what the cultural burning practices are. So we really want to engage more of a community into our work. So this fall, we've got a prescribed fire training exchange taking place in October, and we're going to have about 20 to 25 firefighters from around the country in Flagstaff. They're going to be here as what we call learning and burning together. So we've got Jason lined up to give a presentation at that event. We've got some folks from Northern California to talk more about cultural burning practices. And then I think what we'd like to do is build more local knowledge of the subject. We'd like to spread that local knowledge of it as well to people. So we build that network of partners that are working on restoring cultural burning practices. And then through this training exchange, we kind of have two goals. One is just implementing ecological good fire. So we want to get good fire in the landscape. We maintain these thinning investments with getting good fire out there. There's just unknown benefits of good fire in our forest. The second benefit we're really working on is a social engagement. So I don't know what community burning looked like here for thousands of years, but I have a sense it was a pretty big deal. And I'd like to make our burning operations within the city of Flagstaff a lot more of a community effort where people feel ownership in the work. People are able to participate in the work, whether it's just by coming out and watching or literally building some volunteer capacity for folks to help support these programs. There's training and skills and equipment that's needed, but we can work with the community on developing that. We don't want this just to be seen as some sort of federal role. This should be a community-owned role where people feel proud of the burning that's taking place and they feel involved with it. This also comes along with the reality that burning makes smoke. And we know that smoke isn't so great for humans, but the smoke has wonderful ecological effects that we're just beginning to discover in the forest itself. The smoke blowing across the bark of a tree creates chemical processes that results in a more fire-resistant bark. There's parasites that grow on trees that are reduced from the heat and from the smoke of the fire. There's just an unknown amount of ecological benefit from the smoke alone, never mind the heat and the actual cycling of the nutrients when the fire goes through an area. So we're going to try to figure out new ways to really engage folks into our burning. And through these training exchanges, we'll start to build some of those opportunities. For example, Northern California had a prescribed fire training exchange, I think about 2 years ago. And they invited a bunch of artists. And so a bunch of painters came out and stood around and painted while a prescribed fire was taking place. And then they can get out and give a different perspective on that process and what they see through an artist's eyes out into the community. We're at our training exchange this year, we're going to have a writer from the New Yorker magazine come out and spend time with us and hopefully share some information about what good fire in the landscape means and get that word out. Very often we see smoke in the air it causes us stress, it causes us worry. And I think we have an opportunity to reduce some of that stress in our community and have a vision where when there's smoke in the air, we say, oh, good, something good is happening out in the forest today. You know, that's kind of our end game is we can see smoke in the air and be thankful and not be worried. Let's see. Smoke adapted also means getting into our community and working with smoke sensitive populations. This was another idea we stole from some folks in Northern California that work very closely in some cultural burning practices. And so one of the ideas we took was to get some grant funds and buy air purifiers and just give them away to smoke sensitive people. So the fire department, you know, we know that we have a role to play where if we're going to be putting more smoke in the air, that there are people that have legitimate health impacts, and there's tools out there that can reduce those impacts. So we want to make sure that we make those tools available to our community. So although we were able to buy 96 of these HEPA filters, I want to buy truckloads. I want semi-truckloads of these filters coming to Flagstaff, and we just give them away and help people reduce air impacts inside their homes. So I'm just taking a peek in the chat. Yeah, I mean, that's thousands and thousands of years. I think one of my messages, sorry if I'm repeating it, if some of you maybe heard me say this before, this forest is well over 10,000 years old. This ponderosa pine dominated forest is well over 10,000 years old. And fires were burning through it very regularly. We have the evidence that shows us as frequently as every 2 years, as long of a return interval as maybe 10 years during some wetter time periods. But we turned that process of fire off as a community for about 100 years and completely destroyed the structure and pattern from being a fire adapted healthy system to one that is at risk of dying because of fire. So that's how much of an important process our fire is in our forests, that less than 1% of our forest's lifetime, we've removed that process and it completely changes in its structure and pattern. So really restoring that process, doing it in a community-based way, looking at our cultural leaders like Jason and some other folks to give us some guidance on how best we can do that and how we can really integrate some additional values into our work. So it's not just a bunch of green trucks or red trucks, but it's this community-based burning program is really something that we're looking to build through our flexibility that we have as a fire department in comparison to our federal partners on the other side of the fence. So Rose, that's kind of all I had on my to-do list. It seems like we've got some extra time, but if there's any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to stick around.
Hello again. Does anybody have any questions or any thoughts with what Jason or Neil presented today? I know there's a lot of thank yous and a lot of appreciation for the things that you've shared in chat. And I totally appreciate all the people who are on there saying that they're very happy about what they've learned. And so I think this is totally what this day was meant for.
This is Sylvia. I have a question or a please talk about a little bit more. Because I've heard Neil talk before, and one of the very interesting things to me is the difference in the forest between prescribed burns and kind of catastrophic fire, right? And so, like, why did the museum fire cause flooding? Can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think it's something that I didn't understand it before, and so I'm assuming lots of other people don't either.
That's great. Thank you, Sylvia. So I sometimes differentiate between just using terms like good fire and bad fire, because we can have a wildfire that is doing good things to our forest, and we can have prescribed fires that end up doing some things we don't always want. So it's prescribed fires in general are incredibly safe. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to get injured driving to the prescribed fire than you are on the prescribed fire. But the idea is that it's still a variable that we need to work on restoring across the landscape to have better understanding and control of. So something like the museum fire, that Spruce Wash watershed is a very small and steep watershed that drains a lot of water. So that burned at a fairly high severity across not a large amount of the landscape, but a large amount of that small watershed. And so when the soils burn and they get too hot, they can become what's called hydrophobic. And so the soil doesn't absorb water, it kind of sheds water. Like after you wax a car and you see the water bubble up on the hood. That kind of happens after a fire when it gets too hot. We've also been seeing some effects that after extended droughts where we haven't had good monsoon seasons or winter, that the soil kind of becomes hardened, and even soils that haven't burned in a catastrophic way start to become kind of waterproof, almost like a hard sponge. When you try to rinse off the sponge, you got to squeeze it a bunch and kind of get that moisture in there. Some of our soils we observed this year acting like that hard sponge. They didn't absorb water so well at the first few rain events. So the first big monsoon storm we had this year was right on top of that museum fire scar. So we had a very large amount of water falling in a very short duration. Probably would have seen impacts even without that fire up there. But when you add those charred acres on top of it, the water just wasn't able to be absorbed as well, and it just shed down right through the drainage. So I think one of the lessons learned with the museum fire, if that fire was on the other side of the San Francisco Peaks, it really wouldn't have caused our community that much of a big deal. But we lived right below it. Our community was right below that watershed. So that really was an awakening for what the catastrophic fire effects can be if it's in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was only a 2,000 acre or 1,900 acre fire. It was not that big, but it was just a little bit of fire in the wrong place can have bad impacts for our community. We also saw some flooding events in other areas that didn't burn at all, over on Mount Eldon or on the 180 corridor. Those weren't from areas that had received any fire impacts. It was just, I think that's the reality. As we look at some of our climate change predictions, we're saying we're seeing things like altered precipitation. So it could be less water, it could be more water, it could be higher intensity, shorter duration events. So it's even more of a reason to work on restoring our forests so we have fewer acres that are susceptible to fires like the museum fire. That was a long answer, Sylvia. I'm sorry.
No, I like it. And then, so was the earth up there able to absorb water after a few storms? Like, I guess my question is, does that restore itself naturally, or is there something we need to do up there?
When it burns really hot like that, it takes many years and many seasonal cycles to restore itself. So it's going to be a long time before we see sort of healthy regenerating grasses and trees up there. But there are things that the Forest Service and partners are doing to try to accelerate that process. There's mostly it's downstream mitigation these days. So it's trying to prevent the debris and the flooding from getting into the community in certain areas we don't want it to be. That's more on our human time scale. I think that the land recovery will be on a much longer time scale. But we see areas around Flagstaff that burned pretty hot many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, that are, it may not have been the same as it was, but they are recovering. We're seeing grass, we're seeing flowers and small trees growing in some of those areas. But it's I think the biggest lesson learned is we need to prevent those kind of impacts before they occur. County Supervisor Art Babbitt used to always say, and I liked his message, we're on the losing end when we're responding to catastrophic fire. We're on the winning end when we prevent catastrophic fire.
Hey, Neil, Jason, if I might chime in. So one of the difficulties of our modern times is we're dealing with these changes that we've never had to deal with before in our current existence, in our historical existence. So people living in the wildland urban interface, people living in the subdivisions in town, like right in amongst the trees, like that wasn't a problem even 20, 30 years ago. But these are new issues that we have to deal with. So from some of our native perspectives, it's like just let fires burn, let it do what it does. But now we have a whole new things to consider that we didn't have to consider before, and post-fire effects and all of our mitigations become an important part of those planning processes. But I think it's really important for people to realize that some of this is like this is something we gotta mitigate and we gotta figure out because we didn't have to deal with it before. Our grandparents didn't have to deal with woolly fires. Our grandparents didn't have to deal with this current climate that we're in, where we're having a lot of tree mortality. So in terms of natural and unnatural, we like to let natural things happen, but now we're dealing with almost everything is unnatural. It's really hard to make decisions about that, I guess. It's just a comment.
No, that was great, Jason. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of archae sites right at the base of Mount Eldon in the Dry Lake Hills area. And you know, they probably dealt with pretty big rain events over the centuries and over thousands of years and learned how to live with it.
Definitely.
Hi, I'm Brenda, and I was just having a question about, you're talking about mitigating forest fires or trying to see how you could lessen the impact of the fires. I noticed a drive coming from the Navajo Reservation into Flagstaff. There's a lot of, I believe are they juniper trees that have dried up because of the drought, starting from near Waputki all the way up to the base of the mountain. Is that something that you're all sort of looking at, and how do you, take care of the dry trees that are there?
Yeah, every fire person looks at that. It makes the hair in the back of our neck stand up. And that's more of the Coconino Forest, the Kaibab Forest. They're probably working on that particular issue, but it's there, it's visual, and it's happening. And it's something that all communities all across the country are having to deal with. Is this tree kill. It's going to cause a catastrophic fire, like one windy day and a tire blowout, and it's going to be an issue for all of us, and especially the reservation communities, Grand Falls, Waputki. They're going to get a lot of smoke for a short time, and part of the issues we deal with is a lot of our elders and people with respiratory issues, how to keep them safe. And I'm glad Neil brought up the air filters to get them out there. And ideally, we'd want to do some sort of projects and have a little bit of fire and a little bit of smoke. It means a lot less. We're not going to have a big fire. We're not going to have a monster fire with giant, thick smoke that you can chew on, like I've seen before. But yeah, the Coconino people probably have a good answer for that.
Yep, and we've, my job actually is both the city of Flagstaff and the Summit Fire and Medical District. And so we're working with the Forest Service to try to figure out opportunities to steer woodcutters possibly into some of those areas. Some of the juniper trees that are within the firewood cutting guidelines will be accessible, and there's some pretty significant die off around some neighborhoods, and we're going to work with the Forest Service to see if we can get our city crew out there, or put some information in next year's wood cutting packets about some of these areas to try to get people out there, because I mean, we know we can get rid of it if people can get to it for firewood. So that can help reduce some of those fire effects right across along the roads or right near our communities. So we're aware of it. It's hard not to be aware of it. I mean, it's a lot of moisture stress the last few years. It's funny how wet it's been this summer. And even this fall, but in general, we had such low precip for a few winters and a few monsoons that it's most likely kind of a moisture stress that's causing some of them to die. So yeah, we're going to try to get those things cut up and put into trucks and get it out there for firewood if possible.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I don't see anything. I don't have any hands raised. So I think we're good. Okay. So what I wanted to do right now is just provide some ending remarks on what we accomplished today as far as sharing our stories, sharing our knowledge, and just really bridging to current situations and current jobs that we have within our community. I think these are important conversations, and I wanted to start just from some of our comments from last year. It was just really about what can we learn more that's more basic, the foundational type of learning. And so the only thing I could really think about was that just starting with the elements that we all have, that we all live with each and every day, that we just almost sometimes take for granted, and just starting with that and just elevating them into at a different place so that people can take notice and begin to really understand the significance that they bring to people. So that's the only thing I wanted to say, aside from thank you for being with us this long, and thank you for all the time that you've given of yourselves today as well. What I want to do right now is just tell the people who've helped with this today, and I really appreciate their time and their willingness to be helpful to what happened today in the presentations and whatnot, and just recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day from the city of Flagstaff and from our local community. So I want to say the names of our presenters, and I want to say them because I want to pay honor to them at the place where we are right now at the base of this sacred mountain. And I want them to feel that they're valued and they're appreciated. And I want them to feel that because of where we are in a sacred space. And I just want them to know that they are very, very highly valued for the things that they do within our community. So I really want to just say that at this time. So I want to just say names: Mr. Steve Darden, Mayor DC, and Sylvia Strauss, Leroy Shingointia, Nicole Antonopoulos. And then I know Ginny Neiman was with us in spirit. I know she had to attend to other things. Sarah Dector, Carlotta, our councilwoman, Carlotta Talusi from the Havasupai, Aaron Young, Mr. Jason Nez, and Mr. Neil Chapman. Thank you for your time, and be blessed as you go and do your work, whatever you may have to do, travel. Just take care of yourselves and come home safely as you do your work. Thank you for everything today. That's what I want to leave with you.
Aheha, Rose. And I also want to say your name too, Rose Tohi. Thank you so much for putting all this together. It's wonderful.
Sylvia, just remember to stop recording, okay?